Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this chat. We've already been talking for almost a half an hour. We talked baseball, we talked
Right.
business, we talked everything, and it's always good when I get to do these chats and it's a fellow Pennsylvanian. We're not that far from each other, which is always fun. But we were connected by a Canadian in Dov Barron. But your journey has been really amazing, and the way that you help so many individuals really hone in on what their genius is and all those wonderful things. But what I want you to talk about is who is Mark today, and then we'll break down how you got there.
Okay. So I am a differentiation expert. So I differentiate organizations, brands, and thought leaders around a big, sexy idea, a signature idea, the idea they're going to be known for. And then I show them how to get people to evangelize around that idea, how to get the marketplace or people in their company or whoever it is they want excited by that idea. So I've spoken at or worked with some major companies like Google and Adobe and Amazon and American Express, but I'm perhaps best known for helping to differentiate individuals. So Simon Sinek of Start With Why fame, when I first started working with Simon like 16 years ago, I don't know the exact date, but whenever it was when he was unknown. And it was while we were working together that he came up with Start With Why and the Golden Circle and Inspire Action. And people like David Meerman Scott, who some people in your audience may know, he wrote the biggest selling social media book of all time, The New Rules of Marketing and PR. He wrote Fanocracy. He's the opening act for Tony Robbins and so forth. So guys like that, it's what is the thing that's going to attract attention to get people excited about you? And then how do you talk about it, write about it? How do you get it out there in the world?
How does somebody end up being that? Obviously, Dov talked about you. He told me what you did, and I was like, I didn't even know people like that existed, let alone you
Right.
being the man behind it all. Like, how does somebody find their way there?
Yeah. I created it. So years ago, I'm pulling out all my old stories. Years ago, like I don't even know how long ago, I was I was the sales director of the third largest book wholesaler in North America. I helped them sell over $1 billion worth of books. We'd
Wow.
buy millions of dollars worth of books from Random House, Simon and Schuster, Doubleday, and so forth. And it was phone sales. We'd get on the phone and call like buying offices, Barnes and Nobles, independent stores, and so forth. And so over the course of like 14 years or so, I construed that I did live pitching for money well over, and this is underestimating, well over 25,000 times.
Wow.
And so I would have to start a conversation with no money, and I'd have to end with $200 or $2,000 or $20,000 selling books. Like, what is this book? Why is it exciting? What's happening in the world that would cause it to sell now or not sell, and so forth. So I just became very, very adept. I was 3 times nominated for Publishers Weekly Sales Rep of the Year. So I was very adept at understanding what made something important very quickly and how to talk about it in a way that got people excited about it if it warranted getting excited. It was not about like pushing product out the door. My clients were all people who would deal with me all year long. So it was not about burning bridges or whatnot. It's, does this warrant selling or does it not? And so now what it is I do, whether you're a gigantic multi-billion-dollar company or you're an individual, I I essentially say, like what book has Justin written with his life?
Mm,
Whether you've written a book or not. It's what is, because I'm thinking, right? In my mind, it's still 1988 and I'm still selling books on the phone. So it's what is this book that I'm looking at with a baseball cap and a beard and a mustache? What is the book I'm looking at? What's the main idea? What are the ancillary ideas, the subordinate ideas, the stories? Are there any ideas that would make the book of Justin's life sell better if they were elevated to the fore and like we changed the main idea of the book? And now how would I go about pitching it so people would get excited? That's all it is I do. Like I've done that. Like the biggest places in the world. And I just think in my mind, I'm just thinking, okay, what's the book they wrote here?
Yeah. No, I love it. And I love how it translated back to a job you had that led to, your ultimate purpose in life, which is helping people. And talk about one of the biggest stories, Simon Sinek. How did that even come about? Like, how do you find a guy who nobody knew 16 years ago or whenever it was,
Oh,
and you
yeah.
go, there's got to be something there. Like, how do you decide who you want to work with? Because I'm sure you've gotten to that point.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. So with Simon, so this was however long ago, it was at least 16 years ago. I was at a Fortune or a Forbes small business conference at the Javits Center in Manhattan. And I don't remember which it was. But I do remember that on stage was Jim Collins, Good to Great, Patrick Lencioni, Five Dysfunctions of a Team, Jeff Smart, Top Grading, like all these people were up there speaking, these gurus. I think maybe Seth Godin was up there. I'm not sure if I have that right. But anyway, those other guys were definitely there. And there were about 2,000 entrepreneurs in the audience. And now it was lunchtime. And so they said, we're breaking an hour for lunch. The lunchroom is next door. Just go over there and come back in time for the start of the afternoon. And I worked the room like no one's business. So everyone piled out. But I remember talking to a guy and we talked and we stopped in the hallway talking. And I don't, about our businesses or so forth. And we talked for about 5 minutes. And then I said goodbye. And he went into the lunchroom. And now, when I went into the lunchroom, I was the very last person of the 2,000 to get into the lunchroom. And there were dozens of big round tables that would seat about 20 entrepreneurs at each of them, like rows of them. And it was deafening. You deal with entrepreneurs.
Yep.
Everyone's talking about their BHAG. They're talking about all their shit. They're talking about everything. They're very, very excited. They're yelling things. Their one-page strategic plan, all these things. And I'm looking for a place to sit. And I see at this one table, there are about 10 entrepreneurs. So all the tables are jammed. But at this one table, there are about 10 entrepreneurs, like a crescent moon, around one side of the table. And then the other side of the table, it's completely empty, except there's a single guy sitting by himself in the middle with no one around him for chairs and chairs.
Wow.
He's just sitting there. So I felt bad for him. So I walked up to him and I said, "May I sit here?" And he said, "Sure." I said, "My name's Mark Levy. What's your name?" He said, "My name's Simon Sinek." And I said, "Simon, what do you do for a living?" And he said, just like this, he said, I'm in advertising. And I said, "Simon, tell me how you're in advertising. In what capacity?" And I don't remember quite what he said. But after a while, I then told him what I did. And a week later, he hired me to help him because he didn't have any of his stuff. He had the ideas half formulated in his mind, but he didn't have them being able to articulate them. I often tell people, look, if Simon had just left these ideas half articulated in his mind, if he didn't go to the trouble to fully articulate them and use them, not only would his life have been very different, but tens of millions of people out in the world, their lives would have been very different. But
Yeah.
there was a time where he could not articulate any of that stuff, you
Yeah.
know? So,
That's
yeah.
unbelievable. And I think there's a lot of people who have half-baked ideas in their head, and they go, I know there's something there, but I don't know what that is. Is there something that an individual can do to help kind of break through that wall that they're stuck on?
Is there anything that individual can help them? do to break through the wall? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that I find, uh, to use a word I just used, articulation is incredibly important. So if you have half formed ideas, it's incredibly important that you take the time to communicate them to other people. It's other people will give you interesting ideas about them, but it's more for you to go to the trouble of finishing the thoughts up so that, and I'll give you another example from, so I wrote a book for Random House. I have a background as a magician. I co-created the highest rated live show in New York City. It's run for 25 years, highest rated on TripAdvisor. It's called Chamber Magic. So created that over 25 years ago.
I was going to
And
ask
so,
about that. So put that in your pocket because we're going to
yeah,
have a
we'll
magic
get back to
conversation
that in a
later.
second. But independent of Chamber Magic, I co-wrote a book for Random House with a friend of mine, a famous Las Vegas magician named Mac King. Many of you who've been to Vegas have seen Mac's show. He's played for like 17 years. So Mac and I did a book called Tricks with Your Head. And Mac has the most inventive tricks in his show. And I once asked him, how do you come up with ideas for your show, for tricks for your show? And he said to me, he said, well, I get an idea for a trick and then I tell it to as many people as I can.
Hmm.
Like, but you have to understand when Mac is doing that, he's talking to Penn and Teller, he's
Yeah.
talking to Lance Burton, he's talking, like to all these major. So, what it is Mac gets, he has to create he has to make the idea fully formed and then he has to articulate it in a way that it would be interesting for someone like Penn and Teller to listen to. And then he gets information back from them. And so I can't understand, I can't overstate the importance of if you have an idea that you're not that sure about, that you need to tell people about it. Um, I've heard it called you need to create a vision deliverable about your half formed idea. A guy named Keith Yamashita came up with that term. That is, you need to take your vision and turn it into a short speech or a website or a sculpture or whatever it is. You need something that demands that you finish the idea and you share it with other people. It can change. But if you just let the idea hang out in your mind, it unlikely will ever happen. Whereas if you get it out there in some form and allow it to change, it will happen.
I love that idea, and it's so true. And like to point out, like, hey, he's talking to other great magicians. Like, don't just bring it to everybody. Like, bring it to people who can actually give you real insight into what it is you're talking about. Because otherwise, it'll just muddle it more, I imagine.
Right, right. Oh, yeah. And I've been on the receiving end. Like, I remember Mac telling me without talking about like any of the tricks, like you know, he'll start to tell you about the trick and you instantly start to riff with him on it. But understand that for those of you who have a business who want to talk about it or a business idea out in the world, you need to tell the person that you're speaking to what you want from them.
Mm.
Like, in other words, you need to direct them. You're like a quarterback, and it's like a broken play, and you have to like point like the receiver where they should go. So you need to say something like, "I have an idea for a business, and I want to tell you what it is." And then you tell them, "I want to hear what's good about it, or what's bad about it, or any stories that come to mind about it, or whatever it is you want." Because sometimes I'll create something and I don't necessarily want to hear anything bad about it yet. So I'll say, I just created this thing. I just want you to listen to it and tell me what you like. Don't tell me what you don't like. I don't want to hear that yet. Or the opposite. I might just say, oh, just tell me what you don't like.
Yeah.
So you need to instruct people because the feedback is for you. It's not for them. So you tell them what you want, what's good feedback right now and what's bad feedback right now. And then, right? It makes a big difference.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And so
Yeah.
obviously I can see the book behind you. You wrote a book called The Accidental Genius, which by
Oh,
the
yeah.
way, insane title.
Oh, thank you.
Like Dolph told me it the other day because I think this all happened very quickly. I think I talked to Dolph Wednesday of last week. He
Right.
wanted me to help
Exactly.
him out with something, and then it's Tuesday, and here we are. And I was like, okay, let me dive into this. Talk to us about how you came up with Accidental Genius and what it actually means.
So, Accidental Genius is a book that I first wrote a couple of decades ago. It was a technique that I actually used to create ideas that were unlike any ideas I could have if I just sat there and thought about them. So it's a book on how to use a freestyle form of writing, private writing or free writing, in order to create your best business thinking. And what it is you essentially you sit there and other people have heard of this kind of idea, morning pages, and like there's a few things out there. This book though was from the year 2000, and then there was an updated edition in 2010. But it's essentially you're sitting there, you open up your computer, you grab a pen and paper, and you sit there for 10 minutes. You have a timer and you type fast or you write fast without stopping about you're essentially trying to take the contents of your mind and just drop them onto the paper
Mm,
without editing at all. And that's important for this reason. It's that me, we all have an internal editor that does a very important job. It edits what we think and say and write as we think and say and write it so that we sound smart and confident and consistent to other people. So something Justin says, it sounds like, oh, that's the kind of thing he would say. It's like, oh, yeah, that sounds exactly like you, right?
yeah,
It's of a
yeah.
certain level of excellence. And our internal editor, again, what it's doing is important. It's steering us over and over again to thoughts that have gotten us far in life. This like thoughts and stories that have worked for us in the past. The problem is that when you're trying to come up with ideas that are unlike ideas that you've had before, your internal editor is going to make it impossible for you to think anything different because it's going to steer you to the safe thoughts and the safe stories and whatnot. And you want to go to a much different territory. So that's what free writing does for me. It's the very best technique that I've ever used in my life, helping me to think up new ideas and really get ownership of ideas and things. It's astonishing. And I say this not because I wrote that book. I'm saying the technique exists independent of me. It's, from like the 19th century. It's, that's where originally. And it's just really extraordinary to think in that kind of way.
No, I need to do this. Like, so I'll tell you, I have a book idea. It's partially written. It's based
Yeah.
off of the keynote that I give, that I've been giving for 3 years now. And it's the keynote when I get off the stage, every other speaker then refers to what I talk about in my keynote. And so the book needs to be written. And I just literally sit down and nothing happens, Mark. Like I'm just like
Oh,
my brain just stops working altogether. And every time I'm somewhere, everybody's like, "When's the book coming?" Like at my summit, like I got called out 3 times about my book being finished during my own event. And so, I think this would be a great exercise for me to break through that barrier of writer's block. Or I think I'm writer's block clogged. Like it's just done.
because the thing about what I teach in Accidental Genius is that you're not trying for quality. It's a behavioral contract. I'm going to be writing for 10 minutes without stopping. It doesn't matter. I'm going to allow my mind to digress and so forth. The human mind, it's not a precision instrument. So we digress a lot in our thinking. But when we sit down and write, we think of digressions as being wrong. When you're doing free writing or private writing, digressions are right. I mean, that's exactly. I mean, by the way, even when I'm working with someone to differentiate them, any of my clients will tell you this. Like, we often in any conversation often go very far afield. And that's because if you only tell me the linear logical stuff, you already know what that is. That's why you're stuck,
Yeah.
because you already know what it is. So it's essential that you go far afield in order to come up with interesting ideas. A related thought. There's a wonderful marketer named Rory Sutherland, and in his book, he had written, and I very much agree with this. He said that if you just stay logical, you rob the world of its magic.
Mm.
That if you stay in planning your business, if you stay logical, you become predictable and hackable, that everyone will know what your strategy always is. And like, if someone's engine's 500 horsepower, yours is 600 horsepower. Like, it's very, very predictable. It's very, very. So in order to make any kind of splash, you need to become illogical. It's like what David Ogilvy, the advertising executives from the 60s, said. I forget the exact quote, but he essentially said, all the boring stories have been told already.
Mm.
Like, you're going to have to be interesting. So an idea, a case study that Rory had written about 25 years ago or so, there was a cola company in Europe that they wanted to come to America and go up against Coca-Cola. And so they hired a taste test firm, and in order to understand how to position themselves. And the taste test firm said, they conducted a blind taste test, and they said, I have bad news for you. We did our blind taste test. We've been doing this for 10 years. We have never had a product test so poorly as yours did. As a matter of fact, here's a word cloud of people who we had taste test your thing. And as you can see, the word that was most prominent of people drinking your cola was the word disgusting, that they thought that it was just putrid. So even if you adjust the flavor, you're never going to beat Coca-Cola. So it's a bad idea. And so that was the logical thing. They're a cola, and so they need to compete on taste. Because look, a cola has no nutritional value or anything
Yeah.
like that. So it's purely taste is the logical thing. So they said, we can't approach this in a logical way. How else can we beat Coca-Cola? And they said, okay, we have a lot of caffeine. So why don't we create a new category for a drink that hadn't existed? Remember, this is like 20 years ago. It hadn't existed before that. So they said, let's call our drink an energy drink.
Mm.
That phrase, it did not exist. That was brand new. And they said, instead of calling our cola what we were going to call it, I don't remember what they were going to call it, let's call it Red Bull, because Red Bull is in bullfighting when you stab the bull, but you haven't killed it. All you've done is made it angry. And so it's seeing red. That's what a Red Bull is. So to give this connotations of incredible energy, it's an energy drink, it's Red Bull. Let's not let's not serve it in 2-liter containers, because we want to give the idea that it's like nitroglycerin. And you wouldn't make nitroglycerin in giant containers. So let's just make it in little containers that are hard to crush. And let's not sponsor football and other things like that because the colas sponsor that. Let's sponsor extreme sports like cliff diving and things like that. Let's come out with our own magazines and tournaments about extreme sports, and let's do publicity stunts, but they need to be an extreme. So let's have someone skydive, but instead of skydiving from a regular airplane, let's have them go up in a hot air balloon into outer space, literally,
Yeah.
and dive with a parachute from outer space and a hot air balloon. So everything was from extreme. And that's how Red Bull became Red Bull. It was because the logical places were taken. They couldn't do it. They had to become illogical. Again, a cola, the only logical thing is that it's for taste. There's nothing nutritional about it. Like there's nothing else that you could get out of it. So they said, we cannot think the ordinary way. We have to, and that's where they created it. But this is the same for everyone, even listening to this, in trying to differentiate or in your business or something like that. It's the same kind of thing. Like you have to get very unusual about things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I love that. And I didn't know that story. I didn't realize Red Bull, but it tastes nothing like a cola, by the way. Like
Right,
that's absolutely insane. There's like 23-year-old Justin loved a good Red Bull and vodka, but that's because it was Red Bull and vodka. I'm not a Red Bull man. So just I don't understand how they even thought anybody would want to sit down and drink that without having some sort of marketing like that behind it.
right. It's disgusting. It's a horrible. It's a,
It's
yeah,
it's so bad. So I want to shift gears here because you mentioned earlier you're a magician by trade
yeah,
and you've started magic shows in New York City and so on and so forth.
yeah.
When did that begin for you? Because we talked before I hit record and we talked about our love for baseball our entire life. When I
Yes.
was a kid, I also loved magic, and so
Oh, awesome.
I saw David Copperfield in Atlantic City because I grew up in South Jersey and
Right,
all that stuff. Now I'm not quite a fan anymore. Although if you catch a special, I'll watch it.
right.
Where did you find magic, and when did it become a craft for you?
Oh, yeah. So when I was 4 years old, we lived in Flushing, Queens, and my father took me into like a sit-down delicatessen there. And I remember there was a waiter, and I still remember what the waiter looked like today. He was bald with like black hair around the sides of his head, and he had black glasses on, and he had a little pencil behind his ear, and he was wearing like white linen clothes, with like a black stripe, the type you can throw into a washing machine, and it didn't matter. Uh, um, and he said, "Do you want to see a magic trick?" And I said, "Yeah." I didn't even really know what that was. And he took a sugar cube off the table. That's how long ago it was. They had sugar cubes. They don't have sugar cubes anymore. And he took the pencil from behind his ear and he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Mark." And he said, "M. M is for Mark." And he wrote with his pencil on the sugar cube the letter M, and he showed it to me. And then he dropped it face down into my glass of water. And then he had me hold my hand over the top of the glass and wave my fingers. And then he had me take my hand away and look at my palm. And the letter M was on my own palm.
Get out of here.
And I always remember. So that's when I was 4 years old, and I just became smitten with magic. And actually, though, if I can give you, I always go back to pragmatism with these things. If I can give you a really interesting idea from magic, which has to do with anyone's business. I hate it when people try to derive lessons from everything, but this just happens to be one of those lessons that's so important to everything I do that I violate my own rules. I hate it like when I'm reading something and anything someone does, they're trying to like make it seem utilitarian. It's
Yeah.
very forced. It's very
Yes.
forced.
Every new thing they learn, they try and make money off of it.
That's right.
They're the next coach of it. My wife and I were literally just having that conversation. How annoying that is.
Right. So I apologize that I'm violating it a little, but this is just so seminal to everything I do. So one of the reasons why that trick was so effective is because it happened to me.
Mm.
In other words, right? To say again, it happened to me. It didn't happen to my dad. It happened to me. And as a matter of fact, I could have said, I made that trick happen. And I remember a guy I know, a top magician, he's still a top magician today. His name's Michael Amar. Years ago, he did a research study in retirement homes, and he asked people if they'd ever seen a magician live. And anyone who said yes, he said, "Do you remember any tricks that they did?" And 95% of the time, if they remembered a trick, it happened to them. In other words, they didn't remember a woman being sawed in half. They didn't remember a rope being cut and restored magically. They didn't remember any of those things. They remembered, oh, he borrowed a coin from me and that coin bent. Or he took my card that I wrote my name on and it ended up in his wallet, in his, like it was stuff that happened to them. That's what they remembered. So that's why in doing the work I do in differentiation or so, or whatever it is I do, I always try, even if I'm doing a keynote speech, right? Because I'm a keynote speaker, it's always this idea of how can I put like their initial in their palm?
Mm,
Not literally, but how do I take this from being one to many to one to one? Or what can I do that makes them say, I did this, or you won't believe what I did, or
yeah.
something like it's always that. That was, yeah, you get the idea. I
No,
would,
it's so true because like I said, I've seen Copperfield, I've watched David Blaine specials, I've seen all these tricks. I can't tell you one trick, but I have had a magician on the show who had me. He took a dollar bill. It's just him and I. He goes, took a dollar bill over Zoom, and he's like, "What word do you want me to write on here?" I said the word growth because of the show name,
right,
and he ended up, ripping the dollar bill into four, puts the dollar bill in his mouth. Smoke comes out of his mouth, and then all of a sudden the dollar bill was sealed up like backwards
right,
resealed back together.
right.
And then he mailed it to me. So I physically have that dollar bill. It's actually in my drawer over here. I still physically have that dollar bill. I'll never forget that magic trick because it happened to me. That makes total sense.
Right. Well, but I love that. But again, what I'm saying is, even if it has nothing to do with magic, even if it's within in your business, you need to make it as personal as possible for each one, if you can, for each one of your people. Like it doesn't have to be overly involved, but they have to think that they had something to do with the outcome. Like it changed their life in some way,
Yeah.
right?
I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah,
I love it.
it's so important.
So I want to ask you a question I ask every
Yeah,
single person on this show. It's a two-part question.
sure.
The first part is, what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are three things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Oh, that's interesting. I've never thought about my definition of success. So I would say the one thing that, well, my definition of success. This is kind of idiosyncratic, that I put art, and new ideas above commerce, and I know that because, like, for instance, I've worked with social media people who like disseminate things that I'll write or videos that I'll create and put them out and whatnot. But it has to be based on my ideas and it has to be like my writing and so forth. And I remember saying to them, like, you don't understand. And I said, I put commerce here and I'm holding my hand like in the middle of the screen if people aren't watching. I put commerce here and I put art here. And now my hand is way over my head. So, like, to me, the artistic merit of something, like the coolness of it, like, oh, that's freaking great. Like having people go, no effing way. Like that kind of thing, even in the world of business, like it's got to be up there as opposed, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to just doing something for money. So I guess you would say art or getting people to experience an NFW moment
Yeah.
is my highest calling, if I were to put it that way. To get them to see something, a surprise, or appreciate something in a way they hadn't before, that's my favorite thing in the world. And then you said, what three things do I do to ensure that happens? Gee, I hadn't prepared for this at all, so I have no idea. Uh, I'm, I'll, so. So one thing I do is I try to write every day, because when I write every day, doing that free writing, it does create a freedom in me in order to think in new ways. So I come up with much better thoughts that way and more surprising thoughts. So that's one way I try to write every day. Well, I try to write in the morning in order to prepare myself for the day. And then I also try to write at night, which is more about deconstructing what happened during the day. So I'm
Mm,
going to count that as two. Instead
perfect.
of one writing, that's two different forms of writing. And what's a third thing? Oh, well, I try to walk with my dog like 4, 5, 6 miles every single day, much to my dog's disgust. She's like a 20 odd pound dog. She's a smaller dog. And, I take these big, giant philosopher steps where I'm shooting out there thinking things. And she hates that. But I will say this about my dog. So the first half of the trip, my dog is trailing behind me. I'm essentially dragging her. So, like, that's the first 3 miles. Once we pass that 3 mile mark and she knows that we're turning around, like, in other words, it's the way home, now she's like a kite because she is so ahead. Now I'm holding on to her. So that's the thing. She pretends she's tired in the first 3 miles, and then the second 3 miles, she is leading the way like from the Yukon, like bringing
It's
medicine
so
to the
good.
sick.
She's like, we need to get home now. Let me go
Yeah,
lay down.
right, right. I've never had a dog that liked walking in my life. I've had many dogs. They've never liked walk. Must be something about me. It's always
It's the giant philosopher steps, as you were
right,
saying. That's
right,
that's what it
exactly,
is. I got to keep
exactly.
up with this guy. No,
Yeah,
I love that. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question, but before we get there,
yeah.
oh, by the way, I just wanted to point out to you, I've asked that question over 400 times in my life, and you're the only person who said I've never thought about my definition of success.
Really?
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
thought that was really fascinating. Like I was like, wow,
Interesting.
I was like, that's a first. So
What's the most common answer?
Um, that's see, it's difficult because it is always very sporadic, but a lot of it has to do with making sure I'm present with my family or something along those lines. It's more of like a personal thing. Maybe so. My definition of success is I get to do what I want when I want with whom I want.
Right,
And I think maybe a version of that would probably be the most common.
right.
Because if you think about the entrepreneurial thing, is like, hey, we wanted to create our own lives, and at some point, like, when do you say, okay, what am I doing this for? And you end up finding, you realize it's for the people that you want to spend time with and do cool stuff along the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to freak people out, which is in keeping that I've been a magician since I was 4 years old. You know what I mean?
It's so true.
That's in keeping with. And so whether it's in magic or in business, like I'm looking for that effing way. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love it. I love it, man. So before we get to the last question, how can people find you? Where do they find you online? What's all the good stuff?
Yeah. So my website is Levy, Levy, levyinnovation.com. You can email me at mark@levyinnovation.com. And yeah, yeah, that's the
I love it.
best.
So, like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
In my life, what has been my biggest? Do people prepare for these questions ahead of time?
Not usually. Yeah, we do. I do a lot of editing of long pauses during
Oh,
this part of
okay.
the, yeah.
Oh, good, good. All right. Ask me the question again. What is
in
the
your in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
in my life? What has been my biggest moment of growth? Um, um, I've had so many that I don't know about biggest. Well, something that comes to mind, and this may have came to mind because I was talking about early in our conversation, I was talking about working at a book wholesaler and so forth. So I'm thinking back, this is like 40 years ago or so. When I joined the first book wholesaler, I was the 12th person on a staff of 12. I
Wow.
was like the bottom rung person, but I sold books, I did things in my own way. And it was very different from what everyone else on the staff, the way they did. They were very successful selling, but I sold in my own way without going into it. And like 6 months later, I was made sales manager. And so the reason why I bring that up is is when I started, I was criticized for the way that I went about doing the work that I did. And 6 months later, when we could see the results, uh, the person who had criticized me was moved out of his position and I was moved into it. So it gave me tremendous faith to trust my own judgment on things, on taking an artist's approach. Um, it reminds me, I think it's David Cronenberg, the art house director, the guy who directed The Fly and Twin Peaks, or it was Jim Jarmusch. I can't remember. They're both art house film directors. One of them said in Rolling Stone magazine, one of them said, an entertainer gives you those old songs you know and love so well. An artist gives you what you couldn't know you'd want this time, but you know you'd want next time.
Mm,
And so I have always taken the artist approach. Okay, I don't care what you've done. I'm going to do it the way that I think it's going to work.
I
So,
love it.
and that's a big moment of growth. To be able to trust your judgment on things is so important.
Yeah, and so many people go through life and they never learn that lesson. So, like, that's incredible to learn it in such a way 40 years ago, and you've been able to obviously create so much. So, thank you so much, Mark, for coming on the show and sharing your journey with my audience. But more importantly, thank you for the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of lives you've touched through your teachings, starting with Simon and so on and so forth, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm grateful for that, Justin. Thank you. And thanks everyone listening.